This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sirr.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show.
How does a word get into a dictionary? And do words ever get kicked out of dictionaries? Today, we'll be looking at an important new English-Irish dictionary and the latest updates to that grand dame of dictionaries, the OED.
And today's Toaster Challenge guest is poet and naturalist Seán Lysaght, whose new book, Wild Neffin, has just been published by Stonechat Editions. So, the coffee's made,
The toast is on,
and the books are on the table.
Blues, na gormacha, blues music, ceol blues, blue sky thinking, smaointeoireacht isiúil, dragon, dragonfly, snáthad mhór, drag queen, banríon drag, flavour, blas, tá blas mionta sér, níor a blas bith an mradán, coronavirus, coronavirus, lexicographer, folklóirí, dictionary, folklóir.
And that was Peter reading from The Gospel according to Pádraig Ó Mianán.
Otherwise known as the Concise English-Irish Dictionary, just published by Forrest na Gaeilge. A big, thick book, almost 1,800 pages to be precise, edited by Pádraig Ó Mianán, and what a glorious thing it is. 30,000 headwords, no less. Based on folklore.ie, which people might know, or some people might know, the online dictionary, which I can't recommend highly enough because it's one of the most ambitious and important Irish language resources that we have out there, and that has 48,000 headwords. But clearly they all couldn't be fitted into the paper dictionary or nobody would be able to lift it.
Mm-hmm. And when was the last English-Irish dictionary published, Peter?
Well, that's actually one of the exciting things. Exciting if you're a dictionary nut like me, maybe, or also if you're just someone who uses the language and wants to have a physical resource like this to hand. But the last big English-Irish dictionary was actually Tomás de Walderhus, which came out in 1959, which is a huge gap. And there's lots of nice things about this. I mean, what's nice is how it recognises, for instance, there's different dialects. If you look up a word like suitable, you'll get Erunach, which you'll also get the Ulster usage, Forstanach, or the Connemara version, Felunach.
I mean, I actually bought you this dictionary as a gift, didn't I, Peter? So I'm glad to hear that you have been reading it. But can you actually read a dictionary?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, very nice. Thank you for that present. But give me a dictionary instead of a novel, and I'm a happy man, I have to say. But seriously, it's a brilliant experience because, I suppose the whole serendipitous nature of the thing. You look up one thing, the page falls open, and there you are. You can, you're immediately reading all the other entries.
Yeah, and it certainly takes you on a very interesting journey. But do you have an example from the dictionary?
Well, sure. I mean, here's a word that was never off our lips these days, something like lockdown, which in Irish is díon ghlasáil. You might say something like Thomas fui aurdu díon ghlasáil a fui lochar. But then so you're there looking at that depressing word, and you might look at locksmith, glossador, you might look at locomotion, glúiseacht, you might look at locust, locusta.
Are there cheerful things there too, Peter?
So let's forget lockdown and COVID and all the rest of it. Let's look up, for instance, joy, áthas, luchar, jubilation, remade.
But the thing is, I mean, Peter, can't you do all this online, and isn't the dictionary online already?
Yeah, of course it is, and the online dictionary is great, but it's a totally different experience. I think it's kind of like, to me, ordering a book on Amazon as against to walking into a bookshop, and the whole key is browsing. It becomes sort of an adventure. Like your eye wanders, your brain expands, you can see the language kind of dancing in front of your eyes.
We did an episode on bookshops. It sounds very similar to that idea of just wandering. But I mean, do you really do that though? Maybe you need to get out more, Peter. I'm getting worried about you.
Yeah, I know. I'm a pretty sad person, but I used to gaze at and wander through the Oxford English Dictionary years ago, and I kind of got out of the habit. And yet, at the same time, reading and dipping into this new Irish one makes me want to go back to doing that. I suppose it's the whole thing of the physical versus the digital. It's more than just a conversation about modernity or convenience. It's more about a kind of like mode of apprehension in a way. Like it's a way of interacting with the world. I mean, this book is part of that. Just the heft and the smell and the presence of it, which makes me sound, I know, like I'm about 100, but there is something kind of thrilling.
Yeah, there is something thrilling. There is certainly a heft to the book. It's an extremely large book. But I mean, let's go back to Mianán and the need for nearly 2,000 pages of a dictionary. Isn't that how many are there? I mean, who will use it, I'm wondering?
I hope lots of people will use it. They've printed, I think, 8,000 copies. But I mean, I suppose, like for anyone who writes in Irish, it's a huge boon because it's, it's more than just about finding out what the Irish for a particular word is. It's kind of seeing the language in action. It's also, I suppose, you could see it as a sort of a public statement, an announcement that here is this language, here is its proud and various life. It's a recognition of the force of that language, of its diversity, if you like, of a vital part of our cultural heritage as well. So it is all those things as well.
Yeah, I like the idea of seeing it as language in action. But there are other dictionaries, aren't there, Peter? I mean, where would you say this one fits into?
Well, as I say, I mean, there was the 1959, the Walter had, and then, I mean, I can even remember the first serious kind of folklore Gaeilge bear, like, coming out from Neil O'Donnell back in 1977. There's an ongoing sort of eternal dictionary going on in the Acad of Riga and the Royal Irish Academy, which is like an Irish dictionary, and God knows when that will actually be published. I suppose the daddy of them all is Dineen's famous dictionary, and Dineen was particularly famous for, you look up a word, you get maybe 20 definitions, and you might end up getting the opposite of the word that you looked up as well. And it's he was an interesting man. He appears actually, he appears in the scene in Joyce's Ulysses when they're having a discussion about Hamlet in the library, and he's there in the background trying to looking up words and so on. But like, for instance, I mean, there's a great poem by Ian Duig which is based on Dineen's dictionary. Can I read it? Maybe I just read that for you, because it's called From the Irish, and it just, to me, it kind of sums up what it's like, the experience of reading Dineen. So it's From the Irish by Ian Duig. According to Dineen, a gale unsurpassed in lexicographical enterprise, the Irish for moon means the white circle in a slice of half-boiled potato or turnip. A star is the mark on the forehead of the beast, and the sun is the bottom of a lake or well. Well, if I say to you, your face is like a slice of half-boiled turnip, your hair is the colour of a lake's bottom, and at the centre of each of your eyes is the mark of the beast, it is because I want to love you properly, according to Dineen.
Oh, that's very nice. And Peter, your hair is the colour of a lake's bottom. So there you go. I'm complimenting you there. But you haven't just been reading the Concise English-Irish Dictionary. You've been keeping an eye on the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary as well, haven't you?
Yeah, well, the great thing about languages, I suppose, therefore also dictionaries, is that they're not static. They grow continually. They sprawl all over the place. So I kind of like to keep up with the latest developments in English. New words are added all the time. I heard Ryan Tubridy and Stephen Fry giving out the other day about the likes of unpack, as in let's unpack that argument, or drill down. The way people say, let's drill down for the granular detail there, or drop, in the sense of, he dropped his latest book, as in to bring out, to publish, or all the other awful things like virtue signaling or onboarding. This thing of you to onboard somebody, which is like to integrate a new employee into an organization. So I'm going to onboard you into my team, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, these words, they get made up, and if enough people use them, they end up getting promoted, if you like, into the dictionary, like new citizens swearing fidelity to the Republic of Language.
Oh, and so what other examples have found their way into the OED, Peter?
Well, some of the ones I like whatevs, a word much used in our own house, chillax, simples, they found their way into the OED. I'll just give you a few more examples from the recently published, or the September updates. Bakut, which is a dish consisting of pork ribs in a broth seasoned with herbs and spices. You have things like, code hopper, this kind of thing of a person who moves from maybe one form of sport to another, or a code switcher, or a cookie monster, a person or a thing which resembles the cookie monster in being voraciously hungry or greedy, or a craftivist, which is, a person who creates and displays handmade objects, or a griefer, person who derives enjoyment from spoiling the game for others. Things like kitchenalia.
What's that?
Cooking utensils. Well, just cooking stuff, cooking utensils, other items associated with the kitchen, all that.
But Peter, how do these words get into a dictionary? Is it just like they're commonly used, and if they're used by enough people, they will find their way in? Yeah,
there's a whole big process. I mean, for the OED, like, first of all, like a word gets added to their watch list, like a database, and then these come in from all kinds of places, and they ask people, that they have kind of crowdsourcing appeals with the general public, and then if enough people use the word, then the editors look at it and they consider suggestions, and they put and eventually they put it in. But there's a whole team of people examining all of these kind of new occurrences in the language and then deciding whether they deserve their place or not. And then there's a whole, again, there's the dictionary's chief and deputy editors. They all sit around a table and they give the final stamp of approval to the word before it gets put in the dictionary.
And I'd say you'd love to be there, Peter, one of those meetings. Peter, do words ever get kicked out of the dictionary?
Yeah, I mean, you can well imagine it, can't you? I mean, come in, whiffle, spang, hue, your time's up. Mytacism, excessive or incorrect use of the letter M. No one has looked you up in 100 years, so you're fired. But actually, it turns out that words are like civil servants. They can't be fired unless for something like, moral turpitude. Or once a word gets into for instance, the OED, it's there for life, snug as a bug. Immovable. It becomes part of the story of the language, and it's available for, I suppose, researchers or word experts of the future. And if you remove them, I suppose it'd be like a bit like cancelling bits of history, like come in 1916, your time is up, or I'm sorry, Battle of Crecy or whatever, but we've had enough, collect your belongings, security will escort you to the door. So basically you have to keep it all in.
Right, so it's kind of comforting to know that once in, you will remain if you're a word, so no panic. But what's your favourite new word, Peter?
I have a few of them. I mean, I'm torn between, okay, so there's mentionitis I like, which is a tendency to mention something for the sake of it, for the sake of kind of comprehensiveness, or, rather than how relevant it is. I also like nomophobia. And nomophobia is the fear or worry at the idea of being without your phone or being unable to use it. So there is a very relevant word. Yeah. Or even I like 2016 OED word of the year was post-truth, which is relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. But I think if I had to pick my overall favourite is forget about it. If you ever watched Donnie Brasco or maybe The Sopranos, or hung about Brooklyn for long enough, where characters say forget about it, as in for, so it's not an actual word, as in Fuggedaboutit, forget about it. There's even a sign in Brooklyn as you leave Brooklyn, leaving Brooklyn, forget about it. So now it's now an actual word in the dictionary. So I'm delighted to see that.
Yeah, I like that too, Peter. Thanks for telling me that. So forget about it from The Sopranos is now an official word in the OED. That's brilliant, Peter. So I think, Peter, we've reached the end of that little chat, and thanks a million for coming in and talking to us. Peter was talking about the new English-Irish dictionary edited by Pádraig Ó Mianón, and it's published by First na Gaeilge and the Oxford English Dictionary published by Oxford University Press. And the dictionaries are available online as well as in print, and details as usual are at booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.ie. Thanks, Peter.
The spaces of Tarsacone Moor, along with the neighbouring Owenduff catchment, have their own character of wildness, distance and desertion. They may be confined by Corsleeve and the sickle of the Nafinbeg Mountains, but these open catchments impose their own terms of distance as you enter them. Your human pace of progress gets reduced by the terrain, and the mountains are very slow to shift in the long perspective of those wide river valleys. At the same time, as you walk in and begin to connect with the scale of the land, you discover details of terrain to slow you down. A bend in the river, a series of peaty ditches, the traces of a bully shelter, the stone-faced edge of a derelict levee. Whatever was wild in this landscape begins to intermingle with marks of human effort into one impression. But the place is not tamed or diffused. The thoughts of people living here with their livestock, moving over this land, interpreting it with their words, giving it names, of a community bound up with the cycles of light and growth, of scarcity and abundance, all make the landscape even more a wilderness to our thinking, but a wilderness embroidered with human signs. The walker is just the latest in a long succession of pilgrims, pastoralists, anglers and hunters who have come here and left their mark, piling stone on stone to make a boundary or a cairn, or casting flies on the river to catch a fish that would fuel an anecdote over dinner at the lodge. It was out of some general curiosity, without a definite object this time, that I went back to Tarsacawn Moor a couple of weeks later to make another foray into the higher reaches of the valley. The swallows had all gone by then, and the first redwings had arrived as a sign of coming winter. I took the sight of an otter's splashy, whiskery head in Bellacraher Bay as a good omen for my excursion. When I got to the village, smoke was rising in a leaning trail from Podge's chimney, a sign that he was at home. The smoke made his cottage appear like a vessel on a long journey across the sea of the bog. No sooner had I switched off the engine than Podge was standing there to greet me, as if he had been told to expect me. I shook his hand. I had not seen him for a long time, and smiled broadly. But he is a shy man, and did not face me as we talked.
Oh, wonderful. It's great to reach the end of a journey and find a lovely friend there as well. That was Seán Lysaght reading from his recently published Wild Nephin. It's just published by Stonechat Editions, which, true to its title, captures, I think, really memorably the great wild territory of North Mayo and all its riches. So, Seán, you are very welcome to Books for Breakfast.
Thank you, Enda.
So, just a bit about Seán. He was born and grew up in Limerick and educated at UCD. He spent several years abroad in Switzerland and Germany before teaching for some time at St. Patrick's College in Maynooth. He lectured at the Galway Mayo Institute of Technology until 2015, and he lives with his wife Jessica in Westport, County Mayo. Well, the Gallery Press has published 6 poetry collections of Seán's: The Clare Island Survey, Scarecrow, Eris, The Mouth of a River, Venetian Epigrams, Translations after Goethe, Selected Poems and Carnival Masks. His work on the life and writings of Robert Lloyd Prager, The Life of a Naturalist, was published by Four Courts Press in 1998, and his verse narrative of the life of Edmund Spenser was published under his own imprint in 2011 and Eagle Country in 2018. In 2007, Seán Lysaght received the O'Shaughnessy Award for Poetry, and the judges said of his poetry, he is an artist whose poetry is inseparable from his engagement with Ireland's natural surroundings. His work brings us not just to the natural world, but also to the environment of the imagination, the environment of language, the environment of literature, and of the world's store of legend and tale. And this seems to me a citation which seems very relevant to the book of Seán's, which we're celebrating today, Wild Nephin. So, Seán, again, you're very welcome. And I liked in our emails back and forth before this recording that you'd said this will be your pod launch. I know, like many books launched during this time, it's difficult to celebrate the work. But I hope that this will be a pod launch, and I hope we can do justice to your book today, Seán. So let's start off then, just to have a little chat about the book. In your introduction to it, you describe when you first saw Eris and the Nephin Beg Mountains. I think you said you were passing through the area with your wife and you were on your way from Sligo to Westport, and there'd been freezing winds and terrible hail showers, and suddenly there was a clearance. And I thought you described it so well. You said you were stunned by the scale and remoteness of the region as its moorland and mountains glowed in the gentle light of a low sun just about to slip away. It's beautiful writing, Seán. And that was early April 1994. But it took a little bit longer, didn't it, until you actually moved there and began to discover the landscape properly. And I was just wondering, I mean, we could hear it there in the piece that you read, but what for you is so special about North Mayo? What makes it stand apart for you?
Gosh, there are a lot of aspects to it, really. And I suppose the fact is that in many respects it seemed to me like a blank page, a blank landscape. Just referring again to that holiday you described, we had headed for Sligo to begin with. And obviously when you go to Sligo, you think of the Yeats country. And it's a landscape that seems to be very much embedded in the whole, I suppose, the whole emotional and cultural apparatus of the Yeats family. Willie and Jack, and of course old George, Pollexfen and so on. But then when you go from Sligo down to Mayo, I felt as if I was leaving behind the Yeats country and coming into a landscape that in some respects was much more secular, it appeared to me at the time. It was a landscape, perhaps, if it carried cultural marks, as I understood it then, it was more about Robert Lloyd Prager and botanists and people looking at natural history. And so, in a way, you were freeing yourself from the kind of the authority and the eminence of the Yates family and moving to another area which was just wilder, more secular, if you like. But then there's just the physical scale of the place. I mean, you're talking about 30 kilometres from Mulranny out to Lahardane, and then from Bangor right down to Newport, another 30 kilometres or so. And it's an area that doesn't have a road. It has an old pedestrian trail in the Bangor Trail. So it's very much a kind of frontier, it appeared to me then. Now, of course, my ideas about it might have changed, as the book suggests, but it certainly was a frontier. It was a new place, genuinely a new place for me at the time.
Yeah, I mean, and that's so exciting to discover a new place. And I think you really capture the wonder of those trails in the book as well, and the expansiveness of the area and the beauty of it. I suppose it does help as well, Seán, that you're a very fine poet. I've always enjoyed those poems of yours about birds. You've poems called Guillemot or Curlew, or I love your Skylark one. I don't want to embarrass you too much, but I would like to just quote it. A shard of mirror on the moor, an image in the grass, brought the skylarks down from heaven and changed their songs to little squeaks on glass. It's beautiful. And the book, as you said, it's full of the landscape of North Mayo, but also of birds. And I know you're a great lover of birds, because I remember years ago when we had a cottage in Roscommon, you came in and you told us exactly what birds were visible in our field. You told me about a sedge warbler. You wrote that down in our book, and I had never heard of a sedge warbler. Birds are not my area of expertise, but so I know, Seán Lysaght, that you know about birds. You know about eagles and falcons and goshawks and crossbills and greenshank. I learned all these beautiful birds in your book, even snow buntings, which you wrote about in the Clare Island survey. So how important was it to you, that aspect of watching the birds as you walked?
Well, I try not to be an ornithology bore, really, if I can help it. But there was a kind of, maybe you might call it a linguistic or aesthetic point in language. I write about this as well in Scarecrow. In language, when you think about a word like castle or hill or wood, those words seem to be very freighted, again, by, old associations. Whereas when you move into words like Stonechat and Greenshank and Guillemot, we'll say, there's something a little bit fresher, to my perception, about those words. Now, you don't want to oppress people with technicalities, of course, but still there is, to my ear, a freshness about words applying to the natural world that take us a little bit away from the cultural accretions of other terminology. And just to be on a specific point there, I talk about in the book at one point, I talk about vegetation, and I think about the word rose. And T.S. Eliot said, the rose is a flower that seems to be accustomed to be looked at. And you can think of rose as something that has a long history of cultural associations, symbolic references, and so on. So that's one of the things about bird life that appeals to me, is that it can get you into a new set of associations and registers, if you like.
Yeah, that's interesting, Seán.
There's a great tradition of landscape or nature writing. I'm thinking of people that you mentioned, people like Richard Lloyd Prager. I mean, you obviously have a particular interest in, and you wrote a book about. I'm also thinking of the extraordinary work of people like Tim Robinson or Robert Macfarlane, or even the poet Kathleen Jamie. And I was just wondering, I mean, do you see yourself in that tradition? Does that tradition mean a good deal to you?
Sure, it means a great deal to me. And of course, Tim Robinson's achievement is really, it's unprecedented, unparalleled, and I don't think it can be emulated. I wouldn't pretend to be emulating Tim Robinson, because his 5 books about landscape are an outcome of a lifetime's fascination, absorption in walking, map making, and so on. But there is certainly a growing body of work now which does address the Irish and British landscapes. But there was something that I suppose it was a little cultural crux. It was the fact that Tim Robinson comes from England and brings a particular perception to bear on the Aran Islands and then the wider Connemara area. And you have other writers as well. Michael Viney, of course, also an Englishman. You have David Cabot, who is from North America, who's a great natural history writer. And it sort of, there's some kind of a cultural fault line here. And I wondered, why is the native witness to the natural world relatively weak, relatively underrepresented? And really, the figure who I would sort of wheel in here is Auli O'Sullivan, the great author of the Kinlay, of the journal. And I think if we didn't have this linguistic fault line through Irish tradition, I think Auli O'Sullivan would be our Gilbert White. But of course, the problem for Auli O'Sullivan writing in the 1820s and 1830s is that there was no standard written form of Irish. There was no publishing process. There was really no context a writer would normally have to articulate their ideas. So all of Auli O'Sullivan's work is this manuscript, this extraordinary Kinlay that, of course, has been published and has undergone a few, has morphed into some selections and shorter editions. But I think part of our problem is the linguistic fault line in the Irish tradition.
I'm just wondering if there's a sort of ambiguity in Ireland to some extent about nature and about wilderness as well. I mean, it's something that you touch on in the book. There's an interesting passage at the end where you're met with something less than a fulsome welcome, and it makes you when you're out exploring and you're in a field, and you're approached by a man quite angrily for being in his private property. And it makes you question sort of what's really wild in Ireland, or, the kind of wilderness versus private property. And I'm just wondering, is that an issue? Does that bear on? I mean, is there a certain amount of ambiguity about wilderness, the concept of wilderness in Ireland?
Sure, I think so. I would say that one aspect here is that a degree of our idea of wilderness has been inherited from North America. And what you get in North America is, in the 19th century, particularly in their American writers, like John Muir, for example, you get this idea that, and Simon Schama is quite eloquent about this in his book, Landscape and Memory, is for the pioneers, the American pioneers and the pioneering writers of the Transcendental movement, this idea that, we've lost Eden in Europe, but Eden has been kind of given to us again in North America. We've got another attempt. It's been granted for a second time, so we can try again to have a relationship with this great landscape, this great natural world. Now that, of course, is before there was any real discourse around the fact that you did have a Native American community who lived there and who knew this land and who had their own culture. But I do think that our image of wilderness is imprinted by the North American frontier experience. On the other hand, in Ireland, our relationship with land is very intensely patterned by the experience of the 18th and 19th centuries with landlordism and tenant farmers and so on. And when then finally land reform begins in the late 19th century into the early 20th century, it's all around the issue of ownership. And I think when the estates were broken up and the farmers respectively were able to own their land, we did lose a certain broader picture in terms of expertise and even in terms as well of a kind of cultural relationship with the landscape and the living world because of this very intense and intensely political idea of land ownership.
That's so interesting, Seán. Well, listen, we're going to stop you there on this section of the conversation. Thanks for talking to us about Wild Nevan, published by Stone Chat Editions. At one point in the book, you quote the maxim that no one knows the mountain completely who hasn't slept on it. I know our listeners can't, possibly some of us can't climb mountains at the moment. We can't sleep on them, something I'd love to do. But certainly we can urge listeners to buy this beautiful book and to read it, because it does certainly capture the wild wonder of Mayo. It's really beautiful. So I tell you what, we're going to move on to the toaster challenge now. Peter is waving his slice of toast there. Slice of bread that he's going to put in the toaster. So are you up for a challenge now, Seán?
Absolutely, yes. Actually, I made it up to the garage and I had a croissant already, but I'm sure I can. I think Jessica is baking some bread this morning, so we might make it to the toaster before the end
Oh,
ourselves.
that's nice. Okay, I'm a bit jealous actually. I wish I was there with you. But anyway, we will move on. And Peter is putting the bread down. 1, 2, 3. And you're going to talk for maybe 2 to 3 minutes, Seán, about a book that's really touched you. And we're looking forward to hearing it. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and off you go.
Thank you. I'm talking about Dara McAnulty's Diary of a Young Naturalist. This book was published earlier this year and has been widely appreciated, widely read, and has garnered several awards, including the Wainwright Prize for nature writing. There are many extraordinary aspects to this book. One is, of course, the age of the author who wrote this at the age of 15. Mind you, his career as a writer goes back before that, because he first came to attention as a blogger writing in Fermanagh about conservation issues, about raptor conservation, and eventually then his work came to the attention of Little Taller Books, and they published his Diary of a Young Naturalist. Now, it is many, many aspects. You could see it in the context of, the activism of young people recently with the schools strike for climate, and people getting together in London and Dublin around the Extinction Rebellion campaign and the People's Walk for Wildlife and so on. So Dara is very much at the heart of that wave of activism of young people. Now, he's autistic, and as are his siblings, so he is also, if you like, bringing a message about difference and bringing a message about caring for people who may be different from others. He had a tough time at an earlier school in Fermanagh, and then the family moved to County Down. This is all in the book. This is very much part of the story of the diary. The family moved to County Down, where he went to a different school and found a much happier, more welcoming environment. And at that new school, then he founded an eco group. So that was groups of students just going off at lunchtime or during breaks to look at wildlife, vegetation, and so on, led by Dara. And his father is a conservation scientist. So Dara has been, I suppose, nurtured by his father and his family generally. He has a very precise, very informed knowledge of the natural world. But he's also passionate. He's also politically engaged. He has the anger of the younger generation at what's being done to the planet, and of the apparent inability of the powers that be to change much in the way of our carbon emissions and so on. And a phrase from Yeats comes to mind constantly when I'm thinking about Dara. It's passion and precision. Do you remember that thing that Yeats wrote about the big house? Passion and precision have been one time out of mind. Well, this really is what Dara brings to the debate. He's got the passion, but he also has the precision, the precise knowledge of what he's looking at, be it bird species or flowers or lichens or invertebrates. So it's a very satisfying book from that perspective. And just to conclude, the book is structured as 4 separate sections, one for each season. The final one is winter, incidentally. And I think this has a bearing on our own time now as we're going into winter, which is going to be a difficult winter, with the hope that in the new year we'll have a vaccine. Dara he goes to Glendalough with his family at around St. Patrick's Day, and he sees St. Kevin's cell, and he's thinking about Heaney's poem about St. Kevin and the blackbird nesting in the palm of his hand. And there's an extraordinary epiphany around this idea of caring for the natural world, listening to the natural world, and also seeming to square the demands of outward engagement, political discourse, with the private need for solitude and contemplation of nature. And it leads, at the very end of the book, to a kind of Joycean, a kind of Stephen Dedalus epiphany. I'm ready now. I'm ready to go out and meet the world. And it's really interesting that Dara, as a naturalist, comes back to Glendalough, which is, of course, such an important Christian site. And it's wonderful in this book how he manages to make the scientific, the spiritual and the cultural all cohere in this final epiphany.
Oh my gosh, Seán, you really moved me there in that description. So I'm thinking I absolutely have to read this book. Passion and precision and the movement from, doesn't it follow from his 14th to his 15th birthday? It's a whole year and so much has happened.
That's right.
It sounds to me like it's a book that everybody has to read. And I could see why you were so attracted to it as well. I'm wondering, did you learn things from it about birds and insects and plants and all those things? Did you find that it was educational in that sense for you as well? Because it's hugely intense, isn't it, the way he looks at things?
Certainly. Yes, he has this ability to focus very, very closely on small things. And Dara will tell you things about dragonflies, for instance, and how long they've been around. They've been around for so many millions of years. And he's got the geology terms at his fingertips. He's got the words for different genera of lichens. I'm certainly learning from him. Of course, I tend to forget a lot of these things as well, some of this technicality. Yeah. But, at one stage, he's sitting near the coast in County Down, and he's on a rock, and he calls it a Silurian hornfels. Well, I think that's fantastic. Now, he's not just sitting on a rock, but he's sitting on Silurian hornfells. And that reminds me of Prager's The Way That I Went, where Prager talks about his ability at a similar age to identify different kinds of granite and metamorphic rocks and so on. So interestingly that this young man should also be in the northeast of Ireland, where, of course, the great Irish tradition of natural history began with Prager and his maternal family from Belfast, the Pattersons. So I think that's all fascinating as well.
It is fascinating. And it sounds as well like it's a very poetic book as well, because then when it comes, as you said, back to St. Kevin, and he has this epiphany, it's extraordinary. It sounds extraordinary. And a real tribute, I think, as well to his father as well and the whole family, because they've allowed him this freedom. Well, I suppose he can be himself, really, can't he? And
there is a great sense of a family enabling Dara to follow his interests and, supporting him all of the time. And because of his autism, there is a sense in which the outside world is a challenge to him. There is very often a sense of pressure of people. It might be at a meeting, at a public platform, but even on a smaller scale, just the encounter with others, numbers of visitors in a car park or crowds of people on a nature trail or something. Mm-hmm. So there's always the sense in which the outer world is a major challenge, and then there is the return to the nurturing, supportive context of the family. So it's an incredibly supportive and an incredibly intense family unit.
Oh, it sounds absolutely brilliant. I mean, The Guardian said his prose is both spirited and spiritual. So it does sound, what you've described, it sounds very much like that. Seán, thank you so much.
And incidentally, I just have to say, finally, just before we forget, he's a wonderful stylist as well. He really, really has wonderful, he captures little epiphanies, little moments in the natural world. He's got an incredible capacity of style and expression we have to say it, at the age of 15. It's extraordinary.
I know, at the age of 15, it's unbelievable. Thank you, Seán, for telling us about Diary of a Young Naturalist by Dara McAnulty. It's published by Little Taller Books. And also, of course, Seán, for coming in and talking about your book, Wild Nephin, published by Stonechat Editions. And as usual, all information on both books will be available on our website, www.booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. Thank you, Seán Lysaght.
Thank you, Enda. Thank you, Peter.
I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley, and I have Peter Sirr here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And so
we'll be back again next Thursday morning. We'll have the toast on. We'll have the kettle boiling. We will have more books to discuss. And we're looking forward to having you here. So goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.